The basement laboratory in Rechlin was deathly silent. It was March 1945, and 5 German scientists stood in a circle around something that should not exist. Not here, not in their hands, not with the war crumbling around them. Professor Werner Hartmann removed his glasses and cleaned them for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. His hands trembled slightly as he replaced them and stared once more at the prize before them. An American SCR-584 radar system, captured intact during the Battle of the Bulge. 2 months they'd had it now. 2 months of sleepless nights, racing against the Allied advance, closing in from both directions. "Say it again," Hartmann whispered to his colleague, Dr. Emil Krauss. "Tell me the numbers again, Emil. Perhaps I misheard." Krauss's face was pale, almost gray in the dim electric light. He consulted his notes with shaking hands. The tracking accuracy. It's achieving angular precision of 0.1 degrees. The range resolution is 40 meters. 40 meters, Werner. And the automatic tracking. His voice broke. It's tracking 20 targets simultaneously while computing ballistic solutions in real time. A younger engineer, Friedrich Weber, let out something between a laugh and a sob. "We were children. Dear God, we were children playing with toys." They all knew what this meant. Every one of them had worked on the Vergeltungswaffe, the vengeance weapons, the V-1 flying bomb, Hitler's promised miracle that would bring Britain to its knees, the weapon that would win the war. Hartmann remembered the optimism of June 1944 when the first Von II roared across the Channel toward London. The Führer had promised 10,000 terror weapons raining down on England. Each one carried 850 kilograms of high explosive. Each one flew at 640 kilometers per hour, faster than most Allied fighters. Each one was supposed to be unstoppable. But something was wrong from the beginning. The launch crews reported success after success. The Von II left their ramps in perfect condition, engines screaming, gyroscopes spinning true. They crossed the coastline. They penetrated deep into British airspace. And then, they simply disappeared. At first, the High Command claimed victory. "London burns," the propaganda declared. "The English tremble before German science." But the intelligence reports told a different story. The reports that only men like Hartmann saw, locked away in safes marked with red stamps. Out of every 10 Von II launched, barely one reached its target. Barely one. The Luftwaffe blamed mechanical failures. The SS blamed sabotage. Hitler blamed cowardice and incompetence. And men died for it. But none of them knew the truth. Not until now. "Show me again," Hartmann commanded. The tracking demonstration. Krauss's assistant, a hollow-eyed technician named Klaus, had been a radar operator before his reassignment. His hands moved across the American controls with reluctant familiarity. The SCR-584 hummed to life, its magnetron a device so far beyond German technology it seemed like alchemy warming up in seconds rather than the minutes their own Würzburg systems required. Klaus launched a test drone, a small wooden aircraft no larger than a man's arm. It buzzed into the gray sky outside the facility, remote-controlled, barely visible. The radar found it instantly. On the display screen, another impossibility. A true plan position indicator showing actual target positions in real time, a bright dot appeared. The system locked on. The numbers began flowing. Altitude, velocity, trajectory, predicted path. The radar's mechanical computer, a marvel of analog engineering, processed it all faster than any human could calculate. "Now watch," Klaus said quietly. "I'll make it take evasive action." The drone jinked left, then right, climbing and diving in random patterns. The radar never lost it, not for a microsecond. The tracking was so smooth, so perfect, that it seemed to predict the drone's movements before they happened. "The automatic tracking servo," Krauss explained, though Hartmann already understood. "It compensates for target acceleration. It learns the flight patterns. And this," he pointed to another component, "this is the proximity fuse interface. They're feeding radar data directly to anti-aircraft artillery computers. The guns track automatically. The crews barely have to think. Hartman felt something cold settle in his stomach. How many of these do they have? British intelligence suggested they began deployment in late 1943, Krauss said. By the time of D-Day, they had equipped hundreds of anti-aircraft batteries. Now? He shrugged helplessly. Thousands, perhaps. The Americans are manufacturing them on assembly lines, Werner. Like automobiles. Friedrich Weber had been doing calculations in the corner, scribbling frantically on a chalkboard. Now he turned to face the others, and there were tears streaming down his face. "I've modeled it," he said hoarsely, "using the SCR-584's specifications against our V-1's flight profile. A single radar battery could detect our weapons from 25 kilometers away. It could track their entire flight path from channel to target. It could vector fighters for interception, or guide anti-aircraft fire for—" His voice broke again. "The V-1 flies in a straight line," Klaus said quietly. "It maintains constant altitude and constant speed. It's the perfect target." Hartman closed his eyes. The perfect target. That's what they designed. A weapon so simple, so economical, that Germany could manufacture them by the thousands, even as the war effort crumbled. A weapon that required no pilot, no training, no rare materials. A weapon that flew like a train on invisible rails across the sky. They weren't shooting our Von second down through luck, Hartman said slowly. They were. They were simply reading their flight plans from 25 kilometers away and leisurely deciding how to destroy them. "The fighters," Weber continued, consulting his notes. "The Tempests and Spitfires. They could see our weapons on their ground-controlled interception radars before the Von second even crossed the coast. The controllers would vector them to perfect intercept positions. Our bombs never had a chance to evade because they didn't know they were being hunted until the fighter was already in position." Krauss pulled out another document, this one stamped with British markings. Intelligence had captured it from an overrun RAF station. This is from their fighter command logs. August 1944. A single squadron 28 aircraft destroyed 638 volts. 1 second in 1 month. 638. Individual pilots with scores of 50, 60, 70 Von second destroyed. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the American radar. "How many did we launch?" Friedrich whispered. "How many Von second in total?" "Over 9,000, Hartman replied. "From June to March, 9,000 flying bombs, Hitler's vengeance upon England." "And how many reached London?" Hartman looked at the captured radar, at this impossible machine that had made the Third Reich's miracle weapon obsolete before it even flew. He thought of the resources poured into the V-1 program, the scientists, the engineers, the factories, the launch sites. He thought of the conventional weapons that might have been built instead, the fighters that could have defended Germany's cities, the tanks that could have held the front lines. "Perhaps 2,000 reached the city," he said quietly. "Perhaps less. The rest were destroyed by an enemy who could see everything we did, who tracked every weapon from launch to destruction, who turned our vengeance into target practice." Klaus suddenly laughed, a brittle sound. "Do you know what the British called them? The Von second?" He'd heard it from a captured RAF pilot. Doodlebugs. They called Hitler's terror weapon doodlebugs, like annoying insects to be swatted. Professor Hartman walked to the window. Outside, the March sky was gray and heavy with approaching storms, or perhaps approaching bombers. It was getting hard to tell the difference anymore. "We lost the war before we knew we were fighting it," he said softly. "While we perfected our mechanical computers and our radio beams, while we celebrated our Würzburg radars and thought ourselves advanced, they built this." He gestured at the SCR-584. "We were solving yesterday's problems while they invented tomorrow's solutions. The magnetron alone," Krauss added. "The cavity magnetron that powers this system. We knew it was theoretically possible, but we couldn't manufacture them reliably. They're producing them by the tens of thousands. The power output, the frequency stability, it's beyond anything in our laboratories." Friedrich had stopped crying. Now he just looked numb. My brother was killed at a V-1 launch site. RAF bombing raid. They knew exactly where every site was, didn't they? This radar, they could detect and track our weapons from the moment they launched. They could backtrack the trajectory to the source. Yes, Hartman said simply. How many men died building and launching weapons that had no chance? No one answered. There was no answer that wouldn't drive them mad. A sound in the distance. Suddenly, Klaus held up his hand. Listen. They all fell silent. From somewhere far above came a familiar sound. A sound that had become the soundtrack of Germany's final days. The deep, multi-toned rumble of Allied bombers. Hundreds of them, flying in perfect formation. Klaus turned the SCR-584 skyward. The display screen lit up with contacts. Dozens of them, precise formations, each bomber separated by exact distances, flying at precise altitudes, maintaining perfect speed. They know we can't reach them, Klaus said, his voice hollow. They know our fighters are grounded for lack of fuel. They know our radar-guided flak is too slow, too inaccurate. They know everything. The bombers passed overhead, untouchable, invisible above the clouds, but perfectly visible on the American radar screen. Heading east, toward Berlin perhaps, or Dresden, or some other city that would cease to exist by morning. Hartman turned away from the window and looked at his colleagues. These men who had given everything to German science, who had believed they were building the future. Gentlemen, he said quietly, I think it's time we understood something. The British didn't just defeat our Von II with this radar. They didn't just make our vengeance weapon obsolete. He placed his hand on the SCR-584, feeling the warmth of its electronics, the hum of its impossible magnetron. They won the war with it, and we never even knew the battle was happening. 3 days after their initial examination of the SCR-584, Professor Hartman's team made a discovery that turned their blood to ice. It was Klaus who found it, buried in the technical documentation that had been captured with the radar unit. The documents were incomplete pages torn out, water damaged, some deliberately destroyed by the retreating American crew. But Klaus was methodical. He cross-referenced serial numbers, traced wiring diagrams, followed the logic of the system design. Professor, Klaus called out, his voice strange. You need to see this. Now. Hartman hurried over. The young technician had spread out several documents across the work table, connecting them with hand-drawn lines, creating a web of relationships. This radar, Klaus said, pointing to the SCR-584 specifications. It's not standalone. Look here. These data ports, these communication interfaces. It's designed to network with other units. Networking? What do you mean? Klaus's finger traced across the diagrams. Multiple SCR-584 units can share targeting data. They communicate with each other, with command centers, with the gun directors. Professor, this isn't just a radar. It's a node in a network, an integrated air defense system. The implications crashed over Hartman like a wave. How many nodes? I don't know. But look at these frequency allocations, these communication protocols. They've standardized everything. Every radar station, feeding into a centralized command structure. Every fighter squadron, every anti-aircraft battery, every early warning station, all connected, all sharing information, in real time. Friedrich had joined them now, reading over Klaus's shoulder. That's impossible. The coordination required, the communication systems. It's not impossible, Kraus said from across the room. He was holding another document. This one captured from a British installation. It's operational. They call it the Dowding System, after some air marshal. They've had integrated air defense since 1940, before the war even truly began for them. Hartman snatched the document from Kraus's hands, scanning it frantically. His engineering mind filled in the gaps, extrapolating from fragments, understanding blooming like poison in his thoughts. The chain home stations, he murmured. We knew about those. We thought they were just early warning radars. Crude, easy to jam. They were the foundation, Krauss said. The first layer, low-frequency, long-range detection. They see our aircraft taking off from French airfields. Then the chain-home low stations pick them up as they cross the coast, shorter range, lower altitude coverage. Then sector stations process all the data. And vector fighters for intercept. And when our Von second appeared, he gestured to the SCR 584. These were already waiting, the final layer, precision tracking and engagement. Klaus had gone pale. It's like a spider's web. We fly into it, and every movement we make tells them exactly where we are, where we're going, how fast, how high. They see everything. Not just see, Friedrich corrected quietly. He'd been doing more calculations. They predict. With enough tracking data, these systems can compute ballistic trajectories. They know where our bombs will land before the bombs do. They can evacuate areas, concentrate defenses. They turn our weapons into scheduled appointments for destruction. Hartman sat down heavily. His mind was racing through the implications, each one worse than the last. The Blitz, he said suddenly. 1940 and 41. Our bombing campaign against London. We thought we failed because of pilot error, because of fighter resistance, because our bombers were vulnerable. But this system, it was already operational, wasn't it? Even in its early form. The documents suggest yes, Krauss confirmed. More primitive then. Less coordinated. But the framework was there. They tracked our bomber formations from takeoff to landing. They knew our approach routes, our targets, our bomb loads based on how heavy our aircraft flew. And we learned nothing, Hartman whispered. We kept sending our men into the same web, night after night, using the same tactics, the same routes, while they refined their system, perfected it, turned it into this. Friedrich slammed his hand on the table. Someone must have known. Our intelligence services, the Luftwaffe reconnaissance, someone must have seen this system being built. Oh, they saw it, Klaus said bitterly. He pulled out a faded photograph, one of many in the captured documents. It showed a tall metal tower on the English coast, a chain-home radar station. They photographed them. These towers, hundreds of meters tall, impossible to hide. The Luftwaffe even bombed some of them in 1940. Then why? Because we didn't understand what we were looking at, Hartman interrupted. We saw the towers. We saw the antennas. We even captured some early radar equipment. But we didn't comprehend the system. We thought radar was just a tool, like a better pair of binoculars. We never imagined. He gestured helplessly at the SCR 584 and its documentation. We never imagined they would build an entire defense network, automated, integrated, covering their entire nation. Krauss had found another document, this one a captured RAF operations log. Listen to this. August 28th, 1944. A single day's operations. Plot 147. 4 volts 1 second detected at 0847 hours. Course 285 degrees. Altitude 2,000 feet. Tempest Squadron vectored from Newchurch. Intercept achieved 0853 hours. All targets destroyed. Plot 148 6 volts. 1 second detected at 091. 2 hours. Course 290 degrees. Altitude 2,000. 400 feet. Anti-aircraft battery at Dover engaged. 5 targets destroyed. 1 damaged. And crashed into channel. Plot 149. He looked up. It goes on. All day. Every day. They cataloged each V1 like inventory items in a warehouse. How many operators did this require? Friedrich asked. How many people to run such a system? Thousands, Klaus answered. He'd found organizational charts in the documents. Women, mostly. Plotters, they called them. Standing around map tables, pushing markers representing our aircraft. Receiving data from radar stations via telephone and teletype. The entire nation turned into one massive military machine. Hartman rose and walked to the window again. It had become a habit, this retreat, to stare at the empty sky and contemplate their failures. "We had the first operational radar," he said quietly. "The Freya, the Würzburg. We detected the British bombers over the North Sea. We vectored our night fighters. We thought we were advanced." "We were," Krauss said. "Our technology was excellent, but we used it stupidly." Hartman snapped, turning back. "We built individual systems, isolated tools. Each radar station independent, each fighter group operating alone, each flak battery fighting its own battle. The British took inferior technology and made it superior through coordination, through thinking of defense as a system, not as individual components. It was late that evening when they discovered the final piece, and it was the piece that broke them." Klaus had been examining the SCR-584's connection ports, trying to understand every cable, every interface. He found a connector labeled VT Fuse Interface, VT standing for Variable Time. "What's this for?" he'd asked absently. The answer was in another set of captured documents. Krauss found it and read it in silence, his face draining of color. Then he handed it to Hartman without a word. The proximity fuse. The Americans called it the VT fuse, the vengeance-taken fuse. Someone had joked in the margins of the document. Hartman read the specifications once, then twice, then a third time, hoping he'd misunderstood. An artillery shell that detonated automatically when it came near an aircraft, not on impact near, using a miniature radar transmitter built into the shell itself, broadcasting as it flew through the air, receiving the echo from the target, triggering detonation at optimal distance. "This can't be real," he said. "The electronics alone, the size, the durability needed to survive artillery launch, the power requirements." "It's real," Krauss said flatly. "The documents include field test reports. They've been using them since late 1944, against our Von 2nd, against our aircraft, against everything we fly." Friedrich was shaking his head in denial. "Do you understand what this means? An anti-aircraft shell that doesn't have to hit the target directly? That just needs to get close? The hit probability increases by a factor of 10, Klaus finished, perhaps more. And when guided by a radar, like the SCR-584, which can track the target precisely, compute the exact firing solution." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Hartman thought of the Von 2nd again. Simple machines, flying predictable paths, tracked by perfect radars, engaged by guns firing shells that exploded themselves at optimal distance. It wasn't warfare. It was extermination. "How many of these fuses have they manufactured?" Friedrich whispered. Krauss consulted the documents. The Americans alone produced over 20 million by the end of 1944. 20 million smart shells, each one able to destroy an aircraft without direct impact. The room fell silent. 20 million. "We need to calculate something," Hartman said suddenly. His voice was hoarse, but determined. "We need to know the true cost." He went to the chalkboard and began writing numbers. The others watched, understanding slowly dawning. "The V1 program," Hartman said as he wrote. "Each bomb cost approximately 5,000 Reichsmarks to manufacture. We produced over 30,000 units. The launch sites, the infrastructure, the development costs, let's estimate conservatively. 200 million Reichsmarks, total investment." He turned to face the others. "How many Würzburg radars could we have built with that money? How many fighter aircraft? How many trained pilots?" Friedrich did the calculation quickly. 3,000 fighters. Perhaps 4,000. Enough to... He stopped. The implications. Too painful. "Enough to defend our cities," Klaus finished. "Enough to contest the Allied bombing campaign. Enough to matter." "Instead," Hartman said, turning back to the chalkboard, "we built 30,000 flying bombs. Perhaps 10,000 were launched. Perhaps 2,000 reached London. Perhaps 500 hit militarily significant targets. At a cost of 400,000 Reichsmarks per successful hit, not counting the cost in resources, in labor, in scientific talent diverted from useful work, he wrote the final number, circling it, 400,000 RM per hit. A single Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter cost 87,000 Reichsmarks, Krause said softly, and could be used hundreds of times. The mathematics of failure stared at them from the chalkboard. But the worst part, Friedrich said, his voice breaking, isn't the money. It's the time. We spent 2 years developing and deploying the V1. 2 years during which we could have been developing countermeasures to this. He pointed at the SCR 584. 2 years while they perfected their defenses, integrated their systems, built their proximity fuses. We gave them time to win while we chased vengeance. The door to the laboratory opened. They all jumped. Visitors were rare and usually brought bad news. An SS officer stood in the doorway. Young, hard-eyed, his uniform still immaculate despite the collapsing Reich. Professor Hartmann, the officer said. It wasn't a question. Yes? I'm instructed to ask about your progress. The Reichsfuhrer wishes to know when you'll complete your analysis of the American radar system. There are plans to manufacture German copies to rebuild our air defenses. The scientists looked at each other. The question was absurd, so absurd it was almost funny. Almost. How long? Hartmann asked carefully. Does the Reichsfuhrer believe we have? The SS officer's jaw tightened. Germany is eternal. We will fight until victory. I see. Hartmann turned to the SCR 584, to this machine that represented everything they'd failed to understand, failed to match, failed to counter. To manufacture this system, Herr Sturmbannführer, we would need components we cannot produce. The cavity magnetron alone requires manufacturing techniques we do not possess. We would need hundreds of skilled engineers, factories not currently being bombed to rubble, resources not currently being consumed by a front that stretches from Italy to Poland. How long? The officer repeated. 5 years, Hartmann said. Perhaps 10, if we had an intact industrial base, which we do not. The SS officer's hand moved to his sidearm. Perhaps you need motivation, Professor. Perhaps, Klaus said suddenly, stepping forward. You need honesty, Sturmbannführer. This radar system didn't lose us the war. It won them the war past tense. They won years ago. We just didn't know it yet. The officer's face flushed red. You speak of defeatism. You know the penalty. Shoot us then, Friedrich interrupted. Shoot us all. It won't change the facts. It won't make this radar less advanced. It won't bring back the thousands of von Second that were destroyed like target practice. It won't restore the resources we wasted on vengeance weapons while the Allies built systems that made those weapons obsolete before they launched. The silence stretched. The SS officer's hand remained on his pistol. Finally, Hartmann spoke. We will complete our analysis, Sturmbannführer. We will write a comprehensive report. We will detail every aspect of this system. And someone, someday, will read it and understand how thoroughly we were defeated by an enemy who thought further ahead than we did. The officer stared at them for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. After he was gone, they stood in silence, listening to his boots echo down the corridor. He'll be back, Klaus said quietly. With orders. Yes, Hartmann agreed. Probably to destroy everything and evacuate. Or to destroy everything and us with it. We should make copies, Krause said, of the documents, the analysis, the measurements, hidden copies, so someone, someday, understands what happened here. They worked through the night, photographing documents, copying diagrams, writing their conclusions in careful technical language that tried to mask the horror of understanding. As dawn broke over Rechlin, Professor Hartman stood once more at his window, watching the eastern sky grow light. Somewhere out there, Soviet forces were advancing. From the west, the Americans and British, both sides equipped with radar systems, like the SCR-5, 8, 4. Both sides able to see everything, track everything, destroy everything. And here he stood, in a basement laboratory, finally understanding the weapon that had already won the war. The Von II had never reached London, not because they were mechanical failures, not because they were badly designed, but because every single one had been visible, trackable, predictable, from the moment it launched until the moment it died. The Germans had sent their vengeance into the sky, and the Allies had simply read it like a book and swatted every page. It was Klaus who found the diary, tucked inside a canvas bag with the captured radar equipment, a small notebook, water-stained, its pages covered in neat English handwriting. Property of Flight Lieutenant James Morrison, RAF. The inside cover read, "If found, please return to Biggin Hill." Klaus hesitated, then began reading aloud. His English was good. He'd studied at Cambridge before the war, in another lifetime. June 16th, 1944. My 12th doodlebug today. They come over like clockwork now. Same altitude, same speed. Rather like shooting clay pigeons, except these pigeons carry enough explosive to level a city block. Shot this one down over Ashford. Saw it tumble into a field. No casualties. Another family won't die tonight because of a machine I destroyed before breakfast. Hartman felt something twist in his chest. Keep reading. Klaus turned the pages. June 23rd, 19 today. Personal record. Ground control vectored us perfectly to each one. The new radar systems are remarkable. They see the doodlebugs from France, track them across the channel, and put us right on their tails. My gunner says it's unsporting. I say it's saving London. July 8th. Lost Jenkins today. He got too close to a V. One had exploded when he hit it. 37 doodlebugs he'd destroyed. 37 families saved. His fiancée lives in Croydon. I'll have to write to her. How do I tell her that her James died saving people from a weapon that was already doomed? That every one of those bombs was tracked from launch? That we would have gotten them anyway? That he didn't need to get so close? The laboratory had gone silent, except for Klaus's voice. August 2nd. Met a woman today in London. Her house was hit by one of the few Von II that made it through. She lost her daughter. She asked me how many I'd shot down. I told her 53. She thanked me, crying. I wanted to tell her the truth, that for every one that gets through, we destroy 10. That the Germans are wasting their resources on weapons we can see coming from miles away. But what comfort would that be? Her daughter is still dead. Klaus closed the diary. There's more. Months of entries. He survived, it seems. He survived, it seems. Friedrich had been searching through other documents and found something that made his hands shake. A German document, captured and translated by the British, then recaptured by Germans in the Bulge Offensive. The Circular Journey of Intelligence. It's a report from one of our V-1 launch crew commanders, Friedrich said. Hauptmann Heinrich Müller. Listen to this. September 1944. We have launched 324 volts 1 second from this site in 3 months. We receive no intelligence reports about their effectiveness. The crews ask if they're hitting London, if they're making a difference. I have no answers for them. We launch, and the weapons disappear into the sky. Sometimes we hear British radio intercepts celebrating that London is in ruins, but the British radio we capture says otherwise. Who is lying? What is the truth? Friedrich's voice wavered. We lost 6 men last week to RAF bombing. They seem to know exactly where our launch sites are. We move constantly, hide constantly, and still they find us. It's as if they can see through the darkness, through the camouflage, through everything. My men are exhausted. They're dying to launch weapons we cannot confirm are hitting anything at all. Hartman closed his eyes. Hauptmann Muller. He didn't know the man, but he knew men like him. Dedicated soldiers following orders, believing in the mission because to doubt was to admit that their comrades died for nothing. Krauss had compiled the final statistics from all their research. Now he read them aloud. His voice clinical, detached, the only way to speak these numbers without breaking. Total Von second launched, approximately 10,000. Destroyed by fighter aircraft, 1,847. Destroyed by anti-aircraft artillery, 1,878. Destroyed by barrage balloons, 232. Crashed or malfunctioned en route, 3,000 to 4,000. Reached London area, approximately 2,400. He looked up. Of those 2,400 casualties in London, approximately 6,000 dead, 18,000 injured. Significant military damage, minimal. Effect on British war production, negligible. Effect on British morale, temporary anxiety, but no collapse. Cost to Germany, Friedrich added, consulting his own notes, 30,000 volts, 1 second manufactured, perhaps 200 million Reichsmarks, thousands of workers, hundreds of scientists and engineers, launch facilities across France, costing countless resources to build and defend. Personnel casualties from Allied bombing of production and launch sites, estimated 2,000 to 3,000 dead. The arithmetic of futility. Klaus had found something else, a captured British civil defense document, a public information poster. Look at this, he said, holding it up. It showed a simple diagram of a V1 with instructions. If you see a flying bomb, take cover immediately. Do not watch it. When the engine stops, you have approximately 15 seconds to find shelter. They warned their civilians, Klaus said wonderingly. They told them exactly what to expect, how to survive. They published the V1 specifications in newspapers. They announced how many were being shot down each day. Hartman took the poster, staring at it. While we told our people nothing, while we told our launch crews nothing, while Hitler raged about traitors and saboteurs and never once considered that the enemy could simply see everything we were doing. There's more, Krauss said. He'd found a British newspaper from August 1944, The Times. It published a map showing the distribution of V1 impacts across London. It published statistics on interception rates. It explained how the defense system worked, not in detail, but enough that civilians understood they were being protected. Transparency, Friedrich said bitterly. They trusted their people with the truth. We fed ours lies and called it morale. The last entry in Flight Lieutenant Morrison's diary was dated January 15th, 1945. The doodlebugs have nearly stopped. A few still come, but not like before. Intelligence says the Germans are losing their launch sites in France, falling back. The V2 rockets are more concerning now, can't intercept those. But even those seem desperate, random. Spoke with a radar operator today. She said tracking the Von second became routine after a few weeks. She knew their launch patterns better than the Germans did, she joked. Said she could predict when they'd launch based on time of day, weather, even day of week, as if the enemy was running a train schedule. Klaus closed the diary for the final time. A train schedule. That's what we built. A train schedule of death that ran on time and was tracked by the enemy every kilometer of the way. The laboratory door burst open. The SS officer again, but this time with soldiers. You have 4 hours, he said without preamble. Pack essential documents. Destroy the rest. The Americans are 40 kilometers west. We evacuate to Bavaria. And the radar? Hartman asked. Destroyed. All of it. The Reichsfuhrer's orders. No advanced technology is to fall into enemy hands. The irony was apparently lost on him. After they left, the 4 scientists looked at each other. We should save something, Klaus said. The measurements, the analysis, hidden where? Friedrich asked. We'll be searched. If they find concealed documents, we'll be shot as traitors. Then we memorize it, Hartman said suddenly. We memorize the key specifications, the critical discoveries. We survive, and someday we tell the truth about what happened here. They spent the next 2 hours committing numbers to memory. The SCR 584's specifications. The interception statistics. The mathematics of failure. Each man took different sections, ensuring that if one didn't survive, others would carry the knowledge. At dawn, they watched as soldiers wired the captured American radar with explosives. The SCR 584, this machine that had shown them the future, reduced to scrap metal in a cascade of fire and thunder. But the knowledge remained. In 4 men's minds, the truth survived. The truth that Germany's vengeance had been visible from the moment it launched, that every V1 was tracked, predicted, and destroyed with mechanical efficiency, that the war was lost not by cowardice or betrayal, but by an enemy who simply saw further, thought deeper, and built better systems. As they climbed into the trucks that would carry them south toward an uncertain fate, Professor Hartman looked back one last time at the burning laboratory. Somewhere in England, Flight Lieutenant Morrison was probably alive, flying patrols over a nation that had weathered the storm. Somewhere in France, the men of Hauptmann Muller's unit were retreating or dead, never knowing that their weapons had been target practice. And somewhere in the ruins of the Reich, thousands of Von seconds sat in storage bunkers, weapons that would never launch, built for a war that was over before they were conceived. The truck pulled away, carrying them toward an uncertain future. But one truth remained, seared into their memories forever. They had studied the enemy's radar and finally understood why their vengeance never reached London. Because the enemy had seen it coming all along. Bavaria, May 1945. The Reich had collapsed. Hitler was dead. The war was over. Professor Werner Hartmann sat in a makeshift interrogation room facing an American officer and a British technical intelligence specialist. The room smelled of cigarette smoke and damp concrete. Professor, the American said in accented but competent German, we know you examined the SCR 584 radar at Rechlin. We need to know what conclusions you reached. Hartmann looked at the 2 men. Victor's interrogating the vanquished. He could lie, protect some imagined German pride, or he could tell the truth that had been burning in his mind for 2 months. He chose truth. We concluded, Hartmann said slowly, that we lost the war before 1944 even began, that your integrated air defense system made our vengeance weapons obsolete before they launched, that we wasted resources on spectacular weapons while you built invisible systems that rendered those weapons meaningless. The British specialist leaned forward. Go on. For 3 hours, Hartmann told them everything. The specifications he'd memorized, the calculations, the terrible mathematics of the V1 program's failure. Klaus, Friedrich, and Krauss, who had all survived the chaotic retreat, were interviewed separately. Their testimonies matched perfectly. When Hartmann finished, the American officer exchanged glances with his British colleague. Professor, the American said, how would you like to work for us? By 1947, Hartmann and his team were in New Mexico, working at White Sands Proving Ground. The Americans had brought them over under Operation Paperclip, along with hundreds of other German scientists. Von Braun and his rocket team were there too, working on missiles. One day, Hartmann stood watching a V-2 rocket test. Von Braun's team had salvaged V-2 rockets from Germany and were launching them for research. Beautiful, isn't it? Von Braun said, appearing beside him. The future of warfare. Unstoppable. No defense can touch it. Hartmann watched the rocket arc into the sky and felt a chill. That's what we said about the V1, he replied quietly. Von Braun frowned. The V2 is different. It flies at supersonic speeds, reaches the stratosphere. No fighter can catch it. No gun can shoot it down. Not yet, Hartmann said. But they will build something. They always do. We think about the weapon. They think about the system to defeat it. He was right. By 1950, Hartman was consulting on American air defense systems. The Soviets had the atomic bomb now. The threat wasn't flying bombs anymore, it was bomber aircraft carrying civilization-ending weapons. The Americans were building SAGE, the semi-automatic ground environment. It was the SCR-584's philosophy expanded to continental scale. Radar stations across North America, all networked, all feeding data to massive computers that tracked every aircraft in the sky. Hartman stood in the SAGE control center one day, watching operators track simulated Soviet bombers on glowing screens. The technology had advanced computers instead of mechanical calculators, longer-range radars, faster processing. But the principle was identical. See everything, track everything, coordinate everything. We learn from studying your notes on the British system, an American engineer told him. The integration, the networking, that was the real breakthrough. Not the radar itself, but how it connected to everything else. Hartman felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. His analysis of Germany's defeat was now helping build America's defense. In 1952, Hartman received a letter. It was postmarked from England, and the return address read, J. Morrison, Biggin Hill. His hand shook as he opened it. Dear Professor Hartman, I hope this letter finds you. The Americans told me you were the scientist who examined the SCR-584 at Rechlin, and that you might appreciate knowing the full story from the other side. I was the RAF pilot whose diary you found with the radar equipment. I shot down 93 V-1 flying bombs during the war. For years afterward, I thought of them as victories. But recently, I learned something that changed my perspective. I met a radar operator, one of the women who tracked those weapons from France to their destruction. She told me that toward the end, tracking Von Second became so routine that it was considered training duty for new operators. They knew the launch patterns so well, could predict the trajectory so accurately, that your weapons were essentially scheduled appointments. She said it with no malice, just stating fact. But I realized something that has haunted me since. Every V-1 I shot down was already condemned. We knew it was coming, knew its course, knew where it would be at any given moment. If I hadn't intercepted it, another fighter would have, or the anti-aircraft guns, or it would have malfunctioned. I destroyed 93 weapons that were already dead. How many German scientists worked on those bombs? How many workers built them? How many launch crews died at their sites? All for weapons that were visible from the moment they left the ramp. I don't write this to cause you pain, Professor. I write because I think you understand something important, that technology without wisdom is just expensive failure. The war made us enemies. Perhaps understanding makes us something else. Respectfully, Flight Lieutenant James Morrison. Hartman read the letter 3 times. Then he wrote a response. Geneva, an international conference on missile defense. The Cold War was in full freeze, but scientists from both sides still met to discuss technical matters. Hartman presented a paper titled Systems Integration in Air Defense, Lessons from 1944. He didn't mention the V-1 by name, didn't point fingers, didn't assign blame. He simply presented the mathematics, how isolated weapons systems fail against integrated defensive networks, how seeing the battlefield is more valuable than any individual weapon. In the audience sat a Soviet engineer named Yuri Sokolov. After the presentation, he approached Hartman. Your analysis is correct, Sokolov said in careful German. We are building systems similar to your SAGE. China is building their own network. Soon the whole world will be covered by eyes that see everything in the sky. And then, Hartman asked, then we build weapons that cannot be seen. Or, we build so many weapons that even perfect systems are overwhelmed. Or, Sokolov paused. Or we recognize that perfect offense always meets perfect defense, and both sides spend themselves into poverty-building systems to counter systems. The V-1 lesson, Hartman said quietly. Yes, the V-1 lesson. Build spectacular weapons without understanding that your enemy is building something better. Hartman was 68 years old, preparing to retire. Klaus had passed away 2 years earlier. Friedrich had returned to Germany in 1960. Krauss was teaching at MIT. One evening, Hartman sat in his study in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and did one final calculation. He'd been asked to consult on a new project, missiles that could evade radar, stealth technology, weapons invisible to detection systems. The mathematics hadn't changed in 23 years. For every advance in weapons, there would be an advance in detection. For every stealth technology, a counter-stealth sensor. For every offensive breakthrough, a defensive response. The SCR-584 hadn't just defeated the V-1. It had revealed a fundamental truth about modern warfare, that the side which sees first, thinks furthest, and integrates completely will defeat the side that builds impressive weapons without system-level understanding. Germany had built spectacular rockets, fast jets, and vengeance weapons. The Allies had built boring-looking radars, communication networks, and data processing systems. The spectacular weapons lost to the boring systems. A reunion of Operation Paperclip scientists. Von Braun was there, triumphant his Saturn V rockets would soon carry men to the moon. "We won in the end," Von Braun said jovially to Hartman. "German rocket science conquered space." "No," Hartman replied gently. "American system integration conquered space, using German rocket science as one component. One tool in a vast network of tools. That's the difference. That's what we never understood." He looked around the room at the aging scientists, former enemies, now colleagues, all having spent decades building the arsenals of the Cold War. "We spent the war building Von's second," Hartman continued. "Spectacular, visible, doomed weapons. They spent the war building the systems to see them, track them, destroy them. Even now, we build nuclear missiles, spectacular, terrible weapons. And what do they build? SAGE, BMUs, DEW line networks to see them coming, systems to coordinate responses. But nuclear weapons cannot be stopped," someone protested. "Not yet," Hartman said. "But someone, somewhere, is working on that system right now. And when they build it, all our spectacular weapons will be as obsolete as the V-1 was in 1944. He was right. By 1972, both superpowers were developing anti-ballistic missile systems. The pattern continued. Hartman died in 1971, peacefully, in his sleep. Among his papers was a final letter, sealed and addressed to no one in particular. His wife donated it to the archives at the Smithsonian, where it was filed away and forgotten for decades. In 2019, a historian researching Cold War technology found it. The letter read, "To whoever reads this in the future, in March 1945, I examined a captured American radar and finally understood why Germany lost the war. We built weapons. They built systems. We chased revenge. They pursued victory. But the real lesson isn't about radar or Von's second or any specific technology. We thought about what we could build. They thought about what we would build and how to defeat it. We thought about the present. They thought about the future. We thought about individual brilliant solutions. They thought about integrated systems where each part supported the others. The SCR-584 didn't defeat the V-1 through superiority of components. German optics were better. German aerodynamics were often better. But the Allies integrated inferior parts into superior systems, while we built superior parts that worked alone. If you are reading this in a future I cannot imagine, remember, the spectacular weapon that everyone fears is less dangerous than the boring system that nobody sees. The army with the best tanks loses to the army with the best logistics. The Air Force with the fastest jets loses to the Air Force with the best coordination. We learned this lesson too late, at a cost of millions of lives and a destroyed nation. I hope you never have to learn it the same way. Werner Hartmann. Today, the principle Hartmann discovered lives on in everything from air defense networks to cyber warfare systems. Modern militaries don't just buy weapons, they buy integrated systems where sensors, communications, and weapons work as one organism. The SCR-584 radar the German scientists studied in 1945 now sits in museums. The V-1 flying bombs sit beside it. testament to spectacular engineering that was defeated by better thinking. And somewhere in the archives, Flight Lieutenant Morrison's diary and Professor Hartman's letters remind us of a truth that transcends technology. Wars are not won by the side with the best weapons. They're won by the side that sees furthest, thinks deepest, and understands that every spectacular sword will meet its invisible shield. The Germans built vengeance. The Allies built sight. And sight won.